the pure electric small SUV is an increasingly competitive market. MG really shook it up with the ZS EV, which offers an official range of 166 miles in a practical family car for seriously low prices starting at some £25,500. But it's got more competition now in the form of the Kia Soul EV, which has a much longer official range of 280 miles, but has also got a much higher price of around £34,500. You'd think on that basis that the key question here would be, is the Kia worth the extra over the MG? And that is absolutely what we're going to find out here. But equally important is to find out which of these cars might suit your lifestyle best and your budget. So we're going to put them through a series of tests to investigate that, starting with the thing that most people worry about with electric cars, the range. So I'm going to head out and do the old driving electric range test. Now, I don't want to know what this car does if you hypermile it with the heater off and throw your children overboard and only drive downhill. I want to know what this car does if you drive it like a normal person, which for me means aircon on at 21.5 degrees. I've got radio 6 on here. I'm going to go for level 2 brake regen, which is the one that I find most natural. And I'm going to stick it in normal mode, although I have to say in the Kia I really don't mind. Eco mode is pretty good as well, but I'm going to go with normal, and I'm going to go out and do our course, which is on a closed test track, and we've got roughly equal parts city, country and motorway. So let's go and see what it does. While we're talking about range, we should mention that every electric car keeps a small percentage of the total battery capacity from being used, as this helps to improve the battery longevity and performance. Now, because life would be too easy if all manufacturers stated the usable battery capacity, some state the battery you can use, and some state the total figure. It varies. Kia states the usable, which is 64 kilowatt hour. Its total capacity is just over 67 kilowatt hour. The same as the e-Niro that this car shares its platform and running gear with. Okay, so that is our range test done. Now, the Kia has managed 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour. Now it's worth getting used to that figure because it's basically MPG for electric cars. So you can take that figure and you can multiply it by the battery capacity, which here of course is 64 kilowatt hours, and that is the usable capacity as well. And that gives you a range of 224 miles, which I think is pretty good given that it's sort of 9-10 degrees outside, and that does include quite a bit of motorway driving that we've just done as well, of course. So I think that's really good. And I would add that also in the Kia, I would definitely say that you're going to see upwards of 250, 260 miles very easily. In fact, I ran the e-Niro, which has got exactly the same battery as this car, and I used to quite regularly see 300 miles and more out of that. It does seem to really get very efficient in warmer weather, the Kia and Hyundai system, so I wouldn't be at all surprised if you saw 5 miles per kilowatt hour in the Soul in the middle of summer, especially if you're around town a lot. So that really is impressive. And all we've got to do now is go out and see what the MG can do. We did exactly the same combined driving test in the MG with the aircon toasty and the driving mode in normal, and it returned efficiency of 3.2 miles per kilowatt hour. MG states battery capacity of 44.5 kilowatt hours, but only 40 kilowatt hours of that is usable, and that makes for a real-world range of 128 miles in these middling winter conditions. We would expect to see the MG creep up towards 160 miles in warmer weather. So, of course, the Kia went further in our range test because it has a significantly bigger battery. But we also mentioned the efficiency, and with good reason. We need to get used to the miles per kilowatt hour figure because it is basically MPG for electric cars. So the higher the figure, the further the car is going per kilowatt hour. And it has to be said that the Kia won on that front as well because it did 3.5 miles per kilowatt hour compared to 3.2 in the MG. And to be fair, that's not bad for either of them in these conditions, but there's no getting away from the fact that the Kia wins both on efficiency as well as for outright range. Now, most people buying these cars are going to charge them up routinely with their home wall boxes, especially if they've got the luxury of off-road parking, of course. And that means in the Kia that a home wall box, which will cost you around about £400 or up, will charge the car in around about 9 hours, or the MG in around about 5.5. And also the cost of that currently on a domestic tariff is about £9 for the Kia, or about £5.60 for the MG, although you can halve that if you use off-peak tariffs, more of which we'll talk about a bit later. Both cars are compatible with Type 2 and CCS chargers, which will give you access to the vast majority of public charging points. Find one of these rapid chargers and the Soul certainly seems to have an advantage, as Kia claims a top charging rate of 77 kilowatts, while the MG tops out at 50 kilowatts. In plain English, what that means is that if you can find a powerful enough charger, the Soul will gain 100 miles of range in around 35 minutes, while the MG will take more like 45. Most motorway service chargers are only capable of charging at up to 50 kilowatts, which means that both cars will top up at the same rate. Here, we are going to do a 10-minute challenge. So, how long it takes you to get a cup of coffee and go to the loo, we're going to find out how much extra range these two cars can get at these super fast rapid chargers. Now these swanky new BP Chargemaster points behind me will charge up to 150 kilowatts, which is almost double what even the Kia will do. But I do want to find out how fast these cars will charge in the real world, because basically anything to do with battery charging, to do with battery depletion, so the range of the car, the efficiency, is temperature dependent. It depends on a lot of different outside factors. So we are going to plug these cars in and we're going to see how fast they charge in the real world. They've both got around about 50% battery at the moment, and we're going to see how they do. And, joy of joys, increasingly these chargers are contactless as well, so you don't have to faff about with an app. So I'm going to go and plug them in and see how they do. In the end, the Soul peaked at a rate of 55 kilowatts and gained some 7.9 kilowatt hours of capacity, which gave it a range of 18 miles additionally in our 10-minute challenge. The MG fared much worse, so it managed only 3.9 kilowatt hours of capacity, which gave it an additional 5 miles of range according to our real-world efficiency. That seems like a win for the Kia then, and I would add not only because of the charging speeds. The Kia gets a Type 2 cable and a 3-pin cable as standard, while you will pay extra for that 3-pin domestic cable with the MG. And on top of that, the charging lights, which tell you whether the car's charging properly, if it's fully charged, just that status in general. They're really hard to see in daylight, which is quite a frustration. It also doesn't show chargers on the sat-nav, only petrol stations, somewhat ironically, and there's no function that allows you to delay the charge so that you can take advantage of cheaper electricity tariffs late at night, those off-peak tariffs that I mentioned earlier, without having to come out and plug the car in at midnight yourself. There's also no phone app to offer any remote control of the charging or to preset the climate control, all of which is offered on Kia's new phone app. You can also set the time charging and climate on the Kia's screen, and there's even a location function so that the car knows when it's at home and to stick to the preset at-home charging hours. So there you have it. I don't think that the MG's charging rate is a problem, to be honest. I think for the sort of lifestyle that's going to suit this car anyway, you're not going to do much public rapid charging like this. But it is good to know what it does in the real world, having done this test. I think by far the bigger problem is the fact that it doesn't have an app so that you can easily set the delayed charging to use the off-peak tariffs. I think the fact that the charging lights are really hard to see, the fact that there's no charging stations on the nav, all of that stuff makes it feel like the electric aspects of this car has been an afterthought, because it's all of that that makes the ownership of an electric car better and more easy. So I think that's by far the bigger problem with the MG. Yes, I think some people might expect the Soul to charge even more quickly at up to 100 kilowatts as some of its rivals do, but this is easily charging fast enough for anybody that's going to be using this car routinely, and I'd say that this is a very big win for the Kia. I thought I'd start with the MG for this section because, of course, while I am frustrated about some of those charging features or lack thereof, this still feels like a lot of car for the money, and not only in terms of the space and practicality and all that, but also in terms of the way this thing drives. So you're talking about a 141 brake horsepower motor with front wheel drive, 0 to 62, 8.5 seconds, and particularly, low speeds and even in the mid-range. It feels perfectly punchy enough, I have to say. It does have a few traction issues if you want to get off the line quickly, but that's pretty standard for most electric cars if they've got a lot of torque turning up very quickly. You do have 3 different levels of brake regen in the MG, which you toggle through with a little button down here. So you can toggle through that, so it's very high, medium or light. And it bleeds in pretty smoothly, you get used to it. I would add that even in the heaviest mode, it's not really one pedal driving as you get in the Nissan Leaf. So you are going to have to think a long way ahead if you want to try and do that around town. But at least the brake pedal feel is not too bad, actually. It's pretty straightforward and you don't really have to give it much thought. It's an easy car to drive smoothly. Let's say that about the MG. It does have very light steering, which around town is all right, but it can make it feel sort of a little bit less than impressive on faster roads. I have to say, it doesn't feel like it's got much connection there, so you don't always have a great sense of how much traction there is at the front end, and there might be not much because it does tend to understeer quite a lot, this car. For all of that, it does drive just fine for what you would expect, to be honest. It's quite a reassuring, easy to drive and smooth experience, and I think most people would be more than happy with it. Although I would add that I am less than impressed with the motorway manners of this car, because it is it's just quite wayward, so you don't even realise it's happening at first, but you're driving down the motorway and you realise that you're just putting in tiny steering inputs all the time just to keep it steady in the lane, and that's quite tiring actually, and it's definitely not something that happens in the Kia Soul. Speaking of which, the Kia isn't much faster than the MG, despite the fact that it's got 201 brake horsepower. So of course this is a front wheel drive car as well, and it will do 0 to 62 in just under 8 seconds. It's not really about outright pace in these cars, is it? Both of them feel really punchy, especially at lower speeds, and you can stick both in those sport modes and get much sharper throttle response, and you get quite a kick of acceleration even in the mid-range. And I think that's something that you can really enjoy thanks to the torque of those electric motors. But I would say that the Kia just feels like a much more cohesive, grown-up thing to drive. It's got more grip than the MG, a little bit less body roll, and you've just got a better feel of what's going on at the wheels, really. The Kia tracks straight and true, it feels absolutely composed and steady, and you would do long motorway miles in this car without any problem at all. It's really relaxed actually because of that refinement even at higher speeds, which we will talk about more in a different section in a minute. But with all of that, and also because the Kia has got a slightly cleverer brake regen system, so it's got an automatic brake regen system which uses its adaptive cruise control to maintain the distance from the car in front. You don't have to have that active, you can turn it off, but I find it really good. I find that you get used to it so quickly, and before you know it, it's actually just part of how you drive the car. And I think it all works very well, especially because you can toggle through those brake regen modes with the automatic function active. So you can sort of have the car set up how you like it. Both of these cars have got fantastic driver safety aids. So talking about that adaptive cruise control, both of these cars do get that function. They get blind spot assist, lane keep assist, autonomous emergency braking, and that all functions together to create a sort of semi-autonomous driving mode, particularly in the Kia, because I find that the way it bleeds in the brakes when it's under the autonomous system is really good actually, very reassuring. But the fact that both cars get all of those systems as standard is fantastic, so credit to MG for getting all of that in for the price especially. Now, for all that the MG of course has got loads of equipment and is fine to drive, especially at the money, the Kia does feel almost a class above really, in terms of just the way it's so smooth, it's so intuitive, and everything about it just feels a bit more on point, a bit sharper, more stable and reassuring. I think that's the thing. And in that respect, the Kia is absolutely the better car to drive. We know that electric cars are quieter than petrol or diesel cars generally, and it is safe to say that the Kia and the MG are impressively hushed. But you still get tyre roar, suspension thump and more. So we tested the MG and Kia at 30 miles an hour and 70 miles an hour to see which one of these is the quietest. It turns out that it's the Kia which is quietest, returning 53 decibels at 30 miles an hour compared to 54.7 in the MG, although there isn't much in it. It's really just the suspension thump in the MG, which is very noticeable, that sets them apart. At 70 miles an hour, the Kia undercut the MG by just 0.3 decibels, which isn't anything that the human ear is going to notice, so they really are pretty much on a par, with the Kia definitely having a bit more wind noise, while the MG's tyre and suspension noise cuts in a bit more. The Kia also betters the MG in terms of ride comfort. The MG is just a bit lumpier over town roads, and you can feel the wheel rebounding as well. The Kia suspension is more controlled and does a better job of taking the sting out of bumps in the road. I'm going to start by talking about the boot space, because that is one area which is so important for a family car, and it is one area where the Kia is slightly lacking. Now, this has got a 315 litre boot, which to put it in some context, is pretty much what you get in something like a Volkswagen Polo, so perhaps not that great. And you can see it because it's a slightly shallow boot and it's not a terribly long boot floor either. But to be honest, there is masses of underfloor storage for the cables, and you can actually drop this floor lower as well. So it's going to be fine for a lightweight buggy or a small dog, you know, your normal weekly shop, that kind of thing. But definitely some families will want a bit more space. And if that's the case, you might be better off with the MG, which has got a really decent 470 litre boot. As you can see, it's a much longer boot floor in particular, and you do also get lots of underfloor storage in here as well. So that is definitely score one up to the MG for boot space. Both cars have got split folding rear seats as well, and there's loads of space in the back seats. You'll get 2 tall kids in there no problem, and the Solar's got so much headroom that they'll be able to wear top hats as well. Both are also really well equipped. The Kia is only available in one high-spec trim that comes in at £34,500 after the plug-in car grant, while the top-spec exclusive MG that we're testing here comes in at £27,500. Both get leatherette upholstery, heated seats with electric adjustment for the driver, automatic lights and wipers, keyless entry, aircon, rear parking sensors and a reversing camera. The MG does set itself apart with a panoramic glass roof, but the Kia gets a heated steering wheel and head-up display. In the MG you do get this 8-inch colour touchscreen as standard, and the graphics aren't too bad actually, but the screen does reflect the sunlight quite badly, and while it does get all the equipment you'd want, including Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, digital radio, Bluetooth, sat-nav, all of that, the menus aren't terribly logical to use and it can be really slow to respond. So yes, it has the equipment that you want, but it's not the easiest system to use. Apart from that, I don't think many people are going to have big issues with this interior given the price of this car. The driving position's fine, you don't get lumbar adjustment as you do in the Soul, but you do get electric seats, and you get heated seats as well, but they've only got one setting and it does get hot very quickly, so it can be a bit burny. You get aircon, but you don't get climate control. All of these niggling little things that could kind of bother you on a daily basis. So generally I think the MG's interior is fine. Even these materials don't feel too bad. It's more those little frustrations, perhaps a lot of the squeaks and rattles that we certainly seem to be getting in this test car do give away the fact that it is a bit cheap, and you can see where the cost saving has come in. Even so, at the price, maybe that's not going to bother you. Now, I wouldn't say that the Kia has got the best quality interior either. I would say that it feels a lot better than the MGs, but even some of these plastics up here, even though they look quite cool, they feel quite cheap. But for all of that, these gloss plastics, the general touch points, everything about the Kia feels pretty good. The driving position's really nice, really comfy. It has got that adjustable lumbar support, which I really like. So I think it's going to please you, even if you do spend quite a lot of time in the car. Not only that, but this infotainment system is way better than the MGs. In fact, I would say this is one of the best touchscreen infotainment systems of anything sub sort of Audi, BMW, that sort of stuff. It does get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, as you can see here. It also gets its own nav system, which has got the charging station search function and all of that stuff. It's just generally a really, really nice screen to use. It responds quickly. The menus are pretty logical. It does reflect sunlight a little bit, but it's not too bad. So generally, I would say that the interior of the Soul is a real strong point, and it's kind of funky as well with these sort of the design of these vents around here and this sort of thing. It doesn't get the panoramic roof that the MG does, and that is one thing that I think the MG, you know, you can't quibble with what you get for the equipment. It really is great on that front, so it feels a bit darker in here, but still definitely a nicer place to sit and much better infotainment in the Kia. It does not take a genius to figure out that the Kia is the winner of our twin test, and rightly so. But before we get the champagne out, I want to revisit those costs, because the MG is some £7,000 cheaper than the Soul, even if you buy the MG in the higher spec. And I mean, that's a huge disparity. You could get a second-hand vehicle for that, couldn't you? So I think we do need to emphasise that, and on finance as well, because the Kia is going to be some £500 a month, whereas the MG, it's very easy to get it for £300 per month or even less. So whichever way you look at it, and given that they both get warranties of 7 years, the MG gets 80,000 miles cover and the Kia 100,000, and that covers the vehicle and the battery. So however you look at it, the MG is just astonishing value for money, and it's just a great job in that respect. So if you can live with the range and the multitude of frustrations that comes with the MG, including the bonging and the incessant alarms, the irritation of that nav system and various other bits and pieces that mean you are going to be aware that it's a cheap car, basically, it's still such great value you might not even be bothered about that. But think about the Kia in terms of everything else you can get in the pure electric car class, from the Nissan Leaf, the BMW i3, any of that lot. And actually, this looks like good value itself. It never feels like you're paying too much for this car, given what it offers in terms of the range, the way it drives, the infotainment system, the equipment it offers. It feels like good value, and it feels like a great car, and it is one of our favourite electric cars in any class, and it deserves to win this test. Head to DrivingElectric.com for all of the electric and hybrid car advice, news and reviews you could possibly want. And check us out on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. While you're here, don't forget to hit subscribe on our YouTube channel.